Hey everyone. I've noticed that with a lot of DCS interviews with module makers that things really center about giving visibility about what is to come. This is important for obvious reasons because it gets people excited for an upcoming release. Now, in my personal chats with module makers, I've been spending the most time thinking about their answers when I ask them about what was going on in the past. The answers from those questions have allowed me to put myself in their shoes and to get their point of view of how they approached the module selection process, what documents held them up, what they were thinking about how the module would release, and how it was actually received by the community. After having these conversations, I asked the Cold War module makers if they would be willing to do interviews, and they agreed, so I prepared this as a new series for the channel. In these interviews, we will discuss these points in the context of Cold War and give a perspective about multiplayer. DCS was a different game when their modules first released, and the position of the module has changed over time, and I think you may find it interesting to hear how their perception of things has shifted over time. If this is your first time here, this channel focuses on multiplayer sim gameplay, so if you're into that, please subscribe. I hope you find these interviews interesting, and I will be releasing one for as many Cold War module makers that I can find. If you have any questions or thoughts, please leave them in the comments. I read all of them, and I will try to keep them in mind as I do more of these. Thank you. Overstratos, hello. Thanks for being willing to hop on and to talk about your experience in DCS. Just so everyone has an idea of who we're talking to, it would be great if you could talk about your background, how you got into this sort of development, what projects do you work on, and just to kind of get an idea, because some people are full-time or part-time in this. So if you could just kind of introduce yourself.
Yeah, okay. Hello to everyone. My name is Carlos. I am from Cuba. I graduated in around 2007. I am an aerospace engineer, and I used to work for many years in Cuban Air Force. I work with all kinds of fighter aircraft, like the Mig-21, the Mig-23, the Mig-29, and the trainer L-39. I also did some civilian work in aviation, mainly Mi-8s and Antonov 24 and 26. I got into DCS development because of a friend at the time, around 5 years ago, wanted to work to create a third party for DCS. He got some people with the ones he wanted to have the team, but in the end, the only one that left was me with the idea still. So I made, I believe in 2017, was in that year. I made two models. I made one MiG-19 and one MiG-23 and posted them at the ED forums, asking for people that will be willing to work, creating a new third party. But the pictures were seen by Prowler, which is a Razbam owner, and he contacted me and he asked me if I wanted to work with Razbam. That I was at the time I agreed with him and I started. First, the MiG-19 was my first project with them. You asked me if I am full time. Yeah, for around 2 years. For around 2 years, I am full time working for DCS.
Okay, wow. So it's interesting. So you've been in this scene for a really long time. So thanks for the intro. One thing that I find very interesting is that trying to put myself in the shoes of other people and trying to understand how they approach different situations. So I would really love to hear if you can talk about the module selection process from your point of view, because many players know nothing about what goes on in the background. They just sort of hear about a module when it's first announced. And I would imagine that there's a lot of discussions in the module selection process. Can you talk about what that looks like? And then also kind of curious, like, what does saleability come into versus passion projects? And then are there any issues that you want, like, have any issues come up with any certain modules that you wanted to do but then found out later that you couldn't do it because of like documentation issues or anything like that?
Well, you want to make an aircraft for DCS. The first thing, a most important one, you need to be sure, let's say, for example, that modern aircraft that are still classified are of course a big no. So at first you need to be sure that what you want to do does not enter into the classify area. If it is not, then the main two documents, let's say, that you need to have are aircraft flight manual and the combat employment manual. The flight manual usually, especially for Western aircraft, brings all the aircraft performance, aerodynamic performance. So, and also cockpit description. That's why it's so important. And then the combat employment manual brings everything how the aircraft is used for combat, like how you can use the radar, the armament, etc. It is very important. You also need access to a real aircraft. It doesn't matter if it is active or in a museum, but you need to measure the aircraft. You need a lot, thousands of pictures of the cockpit, the exterior, and nowadays photogrammetry is used a lot because it's safe on measuring. Photogrammetry can give you all the measures of an aircraft down to the millimeter. So it is what we are using now. And it is a lot less expensive than actual laser scans. So regarding how much goes into making something that actually returns a profit, I will say that everyone start and remain working in DCS because of a passion. Most of us use it to work aviation and remain in love with aircraft. So in first, I will say it is a passion, and of course we need to put food on our tables in the end. So of course, many of the selection process, I will say that projects like the Mig-19 was more of a passion than how it actually will solve science. It is an obscure aircraft, but eventually. For example, the Mig-23, what is coming after, is pretty sure it will have more effect on the community. So I would love to do many Soviet aircraft like the Su-15, Su-15, the Mig-27. There's simply no documentation available. Not on the internet, not of any contact I have. So it is what it is.
Yeah, that's interesting because the Sukhoi, the 15, I've heard about this. I think I remember hearing that Russia never exported it, and because they never exported it, it's really hard to get the hold in the manuals. I didn't know that about the MiG-20. I think you said the MiG-27, so that one's surprising to me. So that's actually very interesting. Yeah, it is. I would imagine it's very frustrating because you have a passion, and probably some of these models would sell really well. Especially, I would imagine the MiG-27 would do really, really well. But then it's literally a piece of paper that's stopping you, right? It's the flight manual and then the weapon employment manual. So that's actually really interesting to hear.
There's actually one advantage. We have people like me that are aircraft specialists. There's one thing that happens in aviation, especially fighter aircraft, that there are many systems that are shared between aircraft. So there might be the case that you have enough documentation to do an aircraft with some gray areas that you, with your expertise, you can cover. That also happens.
So. Yeah, no, that makes sense because if you already have the RWR from one and the another plane has it, so I can see how you can bridge it across. But that's
even of more complex systems than the RWR, even of more complex systems. For example, just to put some example, the MiG-25 EV use exactly the same armament systems as the MiG-23. So. Let's say I want to do one, apart from the flight manual. If I have the flight manual and performance manual, I can cover the combat employment with what I know of the other aircraft. Not that is going to happen, but well, you know.
Yeah, so then I guess, so in your opinion then, I guess, because this is a question that I feel like I've always really wanted to ask, is in your opinion, do you think older modules or easier modules are easier to make, and
Yeah.
because I think it's actually very interesting for Razbam because when I look, like I have a lot of different, I play a lot of modules in DCS, and for me, I would probably say that the module selection from Razbam to me is one of the most interesting ones, right? Because the Harrier, which I don't really play that much, but I remember being really excited to buy it, right? I just don't play modern stuff anymore, but it is cool. Like, you know, you can take the vertical takeoffs, and like that's very unique. And the Mirage 2000, like that's an awesome module, and the Mig-19 is like super niche but super fun. So the module selection is very interesting with Razbam, and it also shows a wide range, right, of like the new versus old. So you know, do you think it's easier to model newer stuff or older stuff for DCS?
In the case of what modules are easier or harder, it depends. Usually, it's like a rule of thumb in relation with how old or how new an aircraft is. For example, just so you know how it is, an old module is generally more work intensive in the art department. So why? Because have you seen let's see, an F100 cockpit? It is full of switches, dials, instruments, while a modern one are just three screens and a HUD. Got it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you are doing an older aircraft, of course, it is easier to do in relation to documentation and declassification. It is easier do an old module because nobody cares, and there's usually a lot of documentation about it in that regard. But you go to the artwork of the module. That's a lot of work because they usually have very complex cockpits, very complex landing gears. So it is kind of hard for the artist. But then the coder have it more easy because they are simple systems. It's just maybe one or two radios that are super simple. The aircraft maybe doesn't have a radar and have a telemeter, a radio range finder. So it is much easier. Coding usually is the easy part. It goes faster, while the artist takes more time because there's more devices, instruments, pieces, etc. Now, when you go modern modules, artists generally have it easier, especially in the cockpit because they are glass cockpits. You only need the screens are usually the same. You only need to duplicate the screens. Yeah, maybe one, two, three instruments at most, and the HUD in front of your head that also usually doesn't have too much controls, and if it has, they are same size buttons. So that's how it goes. But of course, I forgot. But of course, then in a modern aircraft, and the coder spends more time working because modern aircraft, as you can see on the Harrier and on the F-18, they have a lot more systems and subsystems for navigation, for combat, for weapons employment, for radar, etc.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I actually never thought about the workload on the artist before, because the way that I've always thought about this question is that the documents for the modern modules are harder to get, or sorry, are hard to get because of secrecy reasons. For it's like a states issue, right? Like a country doesn't want to give up its secrets, so that I understand. But on the flip side, the documents might be harder to get for the older Cold War planes because they may just not exist anymore, right? Like they're not able to get them. You know what I mean? Like they may not be covered up in secrets anymore, but they're just scattered all over the world, and it's kind of hard to get them.
It happens for some aircraft, like the F-105. Generally is for just a little, just a small quantity of aircraft. Usually, most older aircraft, there's documents everywhere available on the internet, the contacts that one makes along work. Other graph in documentation are usually quite a lot easier to get, but there I do agree that there's like kind of a gray area. Later 70s aircraft, let's say the MiG-23, because I have the documentation because I worked with them, and it's on the classified, but it is not available anywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's frustrating, right? Because it's like it's you're almost there, right? Like you can not almost there, but you can almost get started and really do something, but it's just like it's not there.
Yeah, fortunately, I have everything that I need for a MiG-23. Those first generation of the late 70s, early 80s, early 80s, it's a kind of a gray area, especially for Soviet aircraft. I do know there are manuals for U.S. fighters of the time, but especially for Soviet aircraft, that specific time frame is kind of gray. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I understand. So, my next question is, and we kind of talked about this already, so I don't think we need to spend too much time on this. But in your opinion, or sorry, not in your opinion, but like in your experience, can you give us an idea of how much time goes into research of the modules versus the actual building of the modules? Like, what does that? I don't know. I don't know if you can get into as much detail, but like, is it really like a 50-50 split or like a 30-70? 30% for research and then 70% actually building. Like what kind of what does that breakdown look like?
It's not actually that absolute. First of all, as I told before, you need to be sure to have the most important documents, which are, as I told, the flight manual and the combat employment. That is the start for everything. If you don't have those, don't start doing any module. But once you have them, let's say you don't need to become an expert after reading those manuals. You can start working on the artwork of the module, and while you're working on it, you yourself or other member of the team can read the manuals, prepare more documents for about the systems, making them more easier to understand. So the coders that are the guys that bring those systems to life understand. But usually in our case, let's say not every coder is an aircraft specialist. So the ones that that are to explain how stuff works to them, so they can bring with the to work with their code DCS. But in my case specifically, I used to do the research after I have the mentioned manuals. I used to do the research while I am working on the artwork. Once I finish the artwork, I prepare. Because usually, so far, the modules I'm working on are Soviet, so the manuals are either in Russian or Spanish. So if one of your coders is an English speaker, you need to prepare an English document.
So yeah, basically, it's a lot of work to get the even if you have the documents and like depending on the language, you still have to get it ready for like the different team members because there's just like language barriers and that's work in itself to get it ready.
Yeah. In my case, I do the artwork for my projects, but I am mainly a project manager because I like to do the artwork. No, when you need to do something right, you have to do it yourself. So, so, but apart from the artwork, I usually direct the work of the coders, whatever they need, telling how the scenes work, what could go wrong, etc. And do them the documents they need to learn. Because there are many things in real manuals that are usually not needed for DCS. It's stuff that is not modeled in DCS. So I take all that is important, create a document for them, and then instruct them how to make those systems work as they should.
Okay, so let's pivot. So thank you for that background. I think, like I said, I think it's like super interesting to hear about how you think about the projects and the process itself, and kind of how you go into it. But now to get kind of more in the details of history and like your personal experience with working on DCS via Razbam, I would love to hear, like, at the time of working on the Mig-19 project, and I don't know if you can talk about the Mig-23, but kind of when you guys were building the module, I understand you're building it for the entire player base, or ideally the entire player base, right? Like, you can't think of multiplayer specifically, but I would love to hear about where you thought the Mig-19 would sort of be at home, and what was the state of the multiplayer scene then. You've been in the scene for a long time, so I think it'd be interesting for people to hear kind of what was going on in multiplayer back then, and how you guys were expecting the Mig-19 to kind of enter the multiplayer scene.
To be honest, I simply didn't think of that. At the time, I assumed it was going to be an historical setting. Let's say with MiG-21s, 15 Sabres, F5. I believe at the time Cold War servers were not seen still, or if they were, they were not too known. I just, at the time I was thinking, my idea was that it was going to be more attractive to people that like more historical aircraft, and specifically also people from the countries where the aircraft was used. Didn't have a bigger, let's say, idea of what of thinking what service it was going to be used, or even about the multiplayer.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, because the other module makers I talked to, most of them had, or not most, but the ones I talked to so far, have had a similar answer. The answer is that, like, the multiplayer scene was so small, it wasn't even like a real consideration, or they're just focused more on like the entire player base and not necessarily multiplayer. So I'm not really surprised to hear your answer, but it is interesting to, regardless for you to hear it.
Right now, if you were to ask me the same question for the Mig-23, I will have an answer, because there is your server, there's open server, there are a lot of people that have private servers that are very interested in the aircraft. It has the landscape has changed a lot.
So let's talk about that, because like, how would you describe the landscape has changed in DCS? Because like DCS is a very different game, right? It's a different game than it was 5 years ago versus now. It's a different game from lock-on modern air combat. So, like, I guess it would actually be really interesting to hear you talk about, like, what are some like really distinct moments that have happened in DCS, either in multiplayer or just the game in general, or what ED has done, where you're like, oh, that's a really big change. Because to me, it seems like the game is like really accelerating. You know what I mean? Like. And I don't know if it's just me because I'm paying attention more, but I'd be curious to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
I believe the new thing is actually people getting away from the capabilities aircraft, and wanting to know and learn more about a very interesting period in the history of fighter aircraft, that was the Cold War. I believe that's one of the most important change that in the last, let's say, last year or less. So there must more people interested in all aircraft. There must people that I believe they still like it, but they kind of reject the capabilities run, let's say, all these latest ultra modern aircraft. So yeah, that's it. If I were to say what changed, it will be that it will be more people interested in all aircraft and Cold War settings.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've noticed this too, and like I made a video, I forget what, like a month ago or something, because to me, I've been thinking about this for a really long time, like, and to me, it seemed clear just to see what the module makers were making and looking at the roadmap, and it's like, oh, like there's not really that much more coming from modern, right? I mean, there's F-15E, yeah, and the Eurofighter, but I think those are the only two modern ones that are coming up on the pipeline. But then, literally everything else is Cold War or World War II. So I'm convinced. So and I've been noticing too with the player base, just like new people popping in, because initially, like when we launched the server, it was like all the Cold War people that I knew, right? And it was like, and then it was like some Cold War people that we knew, and it was a ton of people from IL2 from the other game that I play. And IL2, which I really do like, that game or the engine really just feels like it's stuck. Like it feels like
I do believe that it has to do a lot with people that used to know nothing about aviation, that actually getting the culture. So they may start learning about fourth plus generation aircraft, but eventually, as they get to know more and get more in love with fighter aircraft, they get to know the Cold War aircraft, and their culture increases, and they start to like. I mean, it is a matter of culture about the aircraft.
yeah, because I mean I say this a lot, and it's kind of hard to quantify it, but like how much soul does the airplane have, right? I mean, the Hornet, like I get it, like there's some people that really love that plane, and they're having fun, and people that are having fun should keep having fun, but I mean, I can't drop another JDAM again. You know what I mean? I can't do it. Like it was cool the first couple of times, like seeing the little bomb or missile or whatever, like go on the FLIR screen and hit its target. It's like great, I did it. You know what I mean? Like I was able to follow the guide, and I pointed and I clicked and it hit it. But like I can't do that anymore. Like it doesn't get me going. But yeah, I think what you're saying, and I agree with, it's that like people start off with those Swiss Army knives, like the F-18s that can do everything, and then it's like, okay, like I want to do something more, and then you find out that like, oh, these Cold War planes, like it's trickier to do stuff, and they're more niche, and like they're not totally capable, but that's kind of what makes them beautiful, right? It's like a Porsche, you know what I mean? Like they don't have the automatic transmissions, and like the old Porsches, like you would have to do a crank to open the window. Like it's something, it's just a different type of, it just hits a little bit different. You know what I mean?
Now, what is my thoughts about this? I believe that the reaction against this new aircraft is not justified. They are still aircraft. Is how progress work in aviation. Eventually, newer and more automatic stuff is going to come. And there are a lot of people that love the aircraft because their country uses, because they work on them. So I believe the problem with the reaction of those aircraft, it has nothing to do with how modern they are. I believe it is, you find flying those aircraft easier or easy because there's still not there's still not an actual words the words leave my mind. Opposition. There's not an actual strong opposition to those aircraft because at the time when the time those opposition can be made, then you will have to work your game more. You have to up your game more. You will have more trouble taking your missions. It will change the perspective that you have. Okay, this is all. It will be maybe too automatic. It will look too easy, but at the time, at the moment when you start to get an actual powerful opposition, it will become hard.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. But I think that's the interesting thing about Razbam too, though, because with the F-15E project, and I know, I think you're not as involved with that project, but I think that module is an interesting one, even though it's modern. It is interesting because you're going to have the two-seat with it, right? So now it's not like you're the super pilot all on your own doing everything, right? Now it's like you're sharing the responsibility with someone else, and that's interesting, right? And like that's like a different take on it. So that's a and that's kind of like upping your game because it's not like making one module a modern module for one pilot. Now it's like for a crew, and that kind of changes the whole formula because the F-14, like flying an F-14 with someone else with a human Rio, like that's a really fun experience, and it's totally different from flying just a MiG-21 or a MiG-19 on your own. So it is interesting.
And also the F-14 is an older aircraft with has a lot of stuff from the third generation. So to Cold War appreciators, it is more appealing.
So, would really like to hear your opinion, or not your opinion, but like kind of your thoughts when the MiG-19 was announced and how, or when it was released, and kind of what were you expecting the community reaction to be, and then kind of like what you saw with the community reaction of when it was initially released.
I thought at first that it would not be too well received because, as I told before, the MiG-19 was kind of an obscure aircraft, even Soviet Union, because the two main versions of the fighter came into service in 1956, I think. Yeah. So that was a day fighter that was faster and had a little more agility, and a night interceptor, which is the one that is in DCS, the MiG-19P, and that later was modified, where they took out the cannons and put 4 rails for beam or radio beam guided missiles. So that was in 1956. But in 1958, there was already a MiG-21, which was a Mach 2 fighter, entering service. So the MiG-19 was kind of a measure against the same first United States supersonic aircraft, but it usually most of the aircraft didn't quite reach the 70s in service still. So it was about a period of 10 to 12 years in service. In fact, here in Cuba, they arrived in 1961, and already in 67 or 68, they were already out of service and replaced by MiG-21 variants. So I don't. At first, I didn't thought it was going to be too well received. But yeah, in the end, it was kind of different. The reception of the aircraft was better than I expected. And recently, servers have had a lot of weight in the sales of the aircraft.
Really, what do you mean by that?
At science, the Cold War servers became more recognized by people. There has been more people buying the module.
It's interesting because I remember the first time I flew the MiG-19. I don't even remember. I don't think I knew anything about the MiG-19 when I first. I think I was just bored one day, and I just I forgot what it was. I think maybe it was when DCS introduced that free trial system, and I think that's what it was. I think I trialed the MiG-19 and I flew it, and I distinctly remember this. I flew it on Alpinwell server, and I was totally crushing it. And I messaged Razbam right after, and I was like, Razbam, I think people don't realize how good this module is. And he was like, I know. He was like, this is a sleeper module. It's really good. and, and then I noticed because I started making videos with the MiG-19, and I was looking at other people like because I look at the other DCS YouTube channels and stuff, and I was looking around and I was like, no one flies this module that much, like or like back then no one flew it, and I just started making videos, and then I started seeing that some people like were like, oh yeah, like this is actually a really fun module because it is. It goes back to what we were saying earlier about the Cold War stuff. It's like it's a very I'm going to use the word quirky, but it's like it's a very niche thing, right? It's like I say this all the time. It's like stepping into a portal of the past. Like when you look at the MiG-19 for the first time, it almost looks like a I mean I know it's a Soviet plane, but it reminds me of like those old school Cadillacs from like the 50s and 60s. You know what I mean? With the fins and everything. It just looks so Cold War. To me, it looks more Cold War than the MiG-21, and it's awesome. And then you spawn in with it, and you look at the gauges, and you're like, oh, this thing is like so old, but it's so capable too, and it's like really, it lives in two different worlds. Like you could see the World War II influence, and you could see what the Soviets were trying to do with it. So I don't know. I love the module. It's actually one of my most favorite modules in DCS. I have so much fun flying it. So, and that was kind of the reason why too, like we made the server, because I was like, I want to be able to fly a MiG-19 like in the U.S. East time zone, because that's generally when Alpinwell's server had like no population, and I was like, this is a really fun module. So yeah, it makes sense to what you're saying.
I do want to say one thing, and it's that at the time the MiG-19 was released, there was like from some people that was like a kind of negative reaction because mostly of the state, let's say the opinion that many people have of Razbam at the time, which was mostly caused because at the time we were still a very small team, and our coders that were only two at the time, they simply do not have enough hands to work on all models and fix all the problems, all the lack of features that were still missing from the modules. That has improved. More coders were brought to the team, a lot more. There have been a lot of more artists also brought to the team that are very professional. And the thing is that this kind of, I believe that this negative reception of some people at the time was not deserved, because the aircraft got into early access with a very good flight model. Thanks to Captain Smiley, did a wonderful job on that flight model, and we had all the documentation, and we have all the documentation needed to make an excellent flight model. And there was some kind of a backlash that this aircraft does not fall into spins, does not stall. I created a tweet in ED forums where I showed the real performance on the aircraft in a chart, and then the DCS performance of the aircraft superimposed over. And the aircraft was almost from a 10 to 5% as close as the real one. And a lot of parameters. The flight model used at the time, what happened to it was that it lacked still a few features that were implemented later. Not because it is my project, but I believe that the MiG-19 at the moment has one of the best flight models of all DCS, especially because of the limitations that are modeled into the flight model, into the systems. All the limitations that in a real aircraft, you just cannot pull the stick all the way back. Let's say at 1,000 kilometers per hour. You just cannot always roll at the same angular speed at any aircraft linear speed. You just cannot do that. You cannot you cannot move yank the throttles. You cannot do that, and many of those limitations are modeled into the MiG-19. Right now, I believe it will be ready for next update. We have been working on inertia, moments of inertia of the aircraft. Roll inertia was added recently, and now for the next update, I believe the pitch inertia will be. There will be an update of the pitch inertia to make it more realistic. But yeah, in general, I wanted to talk about that. That I don't believe the initial negative reaction by some people. I took my time to answer them at the time, but I believe it was not deserved for the model.
Yeah. So okay. So there's a lot there. So the one thing to me that really stuck out. Well, there's two things. One, obviously, your passion for the project. So that's actually very exciting to hear because it is cool. How do I say this the right way? You know, people work in a lot of different industries, right? And there's probably some people that work for, I don't know, like other companies. Let's say EA Games, right? Like that FIFA franchise. Like I'm sure I'm just going to take a guess here and make an assumption, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who work on FIFA that are just sick of that franchise because like nothing ever changes with that franchise, or like other video games where like, you know, like clearly like they don't care and they're just trying to make money. But it is cool to hear you get excited about the project because a lot of people really do love these modules. So it's cool that like it's very obvious that you care about the modules. So that stuck out to me, which is great to hear. And the second thing too, which you said, which to me is interesting, is that like there actually is a lot modeled in the MiG-19, and like a lot of people, I know I can tell from the stats on the server. It's not the most flown module, but the people that do fly it, they can't stop talking about it, and like it's like I don't want to say it's a disease, but it's like the MiG-19 love spreads, right? Because like they start telling other people, and it starts to spread out. And I've seen it where like I've told people, hey, like this is a really fun module, you would love it, and they go tell other people, and then it just keeps going. And like some features for me that stuck out to me when I flew the MiG-19 for the first time, which is interesting, and in a way it might be unique still only to the MiG-19, is like even stuff like when you fly too fast and your fuel bags fall off, right? Because you're going too fast. And it's not like they both fall off at the same time. It's like one falls off, right? And then you have to manage that. It's like, oh, do I want the extra fuel, or do I want to be able to have an easier flight and dump the other store? And like pulling too hard and having your missiles fall off. Like, I mean, I'm trying to think right now. I think the only other module that does anything similar to that is probably the Jeff, and that's still a relatively new module. I don't think any others do that. I mean, maybe some of the other planes like they don't have that issue and they don't have to worry about it and it can't be modeled, but you know what I'm saying? That's a pretty unique thing in DCS.
The problem is that people need to understand that fighter aircraft are not transformers that can pull 30 Gs and go Mach 5. One of the most, let's say, interesting things of fighter aircraft are the limitations they have. With how much load they can take with stores, their limitation of speed, the limitation of the roll angular speeds, the limitation especially in all aircraft because engine technology was not as advanced as it is now, so you could not yank the throttle from 0 to 100 in 1 millisecond. Doing that will make your engine stop in the best of cases. The worst is engine fire and the aircraft explodes. So most of this stuff, we're working on many new, more engine limitations for MiG-19 engines. Should be ready soon. So it is one thing of the fighter aircraft is that you must understand that they have limitations, and it is important and interesting to see how these limitations are being worked on and reduced as the technology in aviation advance.
Yeah. The only thing I do wonder about though is like these limitations. It would be interesting if ED ever tries to standardize them, right? Like I'm just gonna make one up, but like I don't know, canopies fogging over, or stores falling off, or I don't know, whatever, or like even the Mirage F1 had some new limitations that got added in, which I think are neat, which is like you can kill your own engine by flying into the jet wash of another plane. It would be interesting if ED ever decides to standardize this across the board and say like, okay, like all the modules need to do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I believe they have their own plans. It is up to them.
Yeah. Okay, so we already really talked about the Cold War scene. You think it's growing, and you think there's a shift in culture. Like people, they love the modern planes, but now they're starting to really love the older planes, and kind of really, the level of sophistication is really starting to grow in the community. I wouldn't be surprised if this starts to translate more into World War II as well. So that'll be interesting. I know. Is there anything else that you want to talk about, or like any other thoughts you want to share with the community?
Oh, stay tuned. Stay tuned for Mig-23 updates and for the next secret module that comes after it. I believe people are gonna like it too.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually didn't want to ask you any questions about the stuff coming up because I want to avoid all that. But yeah, I'm actually very. I'm super excited for the Mig-23. I think it's going to be great. I want to do like a. I don't know. I've been thinking about it a lot, just looking at what planes and missiles we have available, and like what the Mig-23 is going to bring. Because if you think about it, like if we didn't have the F-14, like imagine what DCS would look like now with the Cold War planes versus the modern stuff, and like that's kind of the situation that we're in a little bit right now with the Red 4 stuff. So the Mig-23 I feel like is going to bridge a really large gap. So I think right now the Mig-23 is probably one of the, or actually no, not probably, definitely one of the projects I'm most excited for. So I send you my energy, Overstratos. I hope the rest of the project goes really well and goes smooth, and we're all rooting for you. And also thank you for tackling these modules that, like you said, initially people may not know a lot about it. It may be really niche, but I think people really fall in love with them because they are cool. Like the Mig-19 is a very special plane. I think it's one of the most fun modules to play in Mig-19, and I would not be surprised if the Mig-23 is like one of my favorites once it's released. So wishing you very good luck and good fortune.
It's really I really enjoy this conversation because this is the first one I ever did like ever. So to be honest, it was kind of hard for me because I'm not a native English speaker. But yeah, I believe more. I need to get used to this eventually, and it was a pleasure sharing this time with you.